I think Pacquiao, to me, is probably the most transcendent fighter the sport has seen since Ali. I mean, when you look at the way he impacts his country, the way he, not only his country, but other people, like the guy has an amazing heart, has an amazing family. I was blessed to meet his family, his mother, his wife, the kids a couple times. I mean, just his legacy overall is the way you want to see athletes shape their legacy, and his commitment to the sport. I mean, everything about him, with a few exceptions, I've grown to appreciate. And I think most of the American public looks at him the same way.
Okay, guys, Pacquiao versus your Dennis Ugas fight. The result was not what we expected, to say at least, because Manny Pacquiao was the favorite going into this fight, and late replacement Ugas actually pulled off an upset via unanimous decision. We already know the result, but what do you guys think Manny Pacquiao did wrong to lose that fight? Let's go ahead and start with Ted.
Well, he got the wrong opponent. And I think that's what you got to look at first. I think if Pacquiao were going to go down a list of opponents, if he had a choice of opponents, before signing up for a fight, and he was on the list, he would have been crossed off first. There's no doubt about it. This is not the kind of, I know Manny's known for fighting just about anybody and everybody out there, but at this stage of his career, one of the reasons that I think that Manny has lasted this long, especially in the last 3 to 4 years, maybe even a little bit longer, is he's chosen the right opponents for him. And he needs somebody who's a little more stable, going to stand in front of him or move forward. And so Manny doesn't have to move as much. This is the wrong guy for Pacquiao. I love scientific fighters. It's not something we see a lot here in the Philippines, scientific fighters. I love guys who use their jab, and I thought it was pretty thrilling to watch Ugas land that jab one after the next. Not that I wanted to see Pacquiao get beaten up, but just from a scientific viewpoint, he really had a great game plan. I like his style, that scientific style, and Manny just looked old. So it was the wrong opponent for Manny. This is not the kind of guy that he needs to be fighting at this late stage of his career.
What about you, Viv? Do you feel like it was just a wrong guy, wrong opponent, on the wrong night?
I think it's a combination of what Ted mentioned, among other things. I mean, if you're gonna look at that list and decide which guy you're gonna pick up with Spence falling off, I think, here's the thing with Manny Pacquiao. He's fighting at this stage in his life, like you said, for a challenge, not for money. So he wants to fight the best. This stylistic matchup was probably not the best option. And not only that, but he took such a hard stylistic matchup coming into a fight with basically only 2 weeks of training for that style. He went, I'm assuming 7-8 weeks training for a totally different style. So you dump someone like this in last minute, you combine that on top of the stylistic equation. And I just think it was a bad scenario for Pacquiao.
So we can all agree that your Dennis Ugas was not the best option heading to this fight. I guess my question here is, why do you think Manny Pacquiao took the fight there? Because as Ted Lerner said, if he was given a list of names who to fight next, he will be crossed off that list. The first name to be crossed off that list. Why do you guys think that he even took the fight? Go ahead with Viv first.
I think the simple answer to that was the fact that this was the person who had the title that he no longer had. I mean, Pacquiao wanted to get the hardware back. He's the draw no matter who he faces at this stage because of his legendary status. But I think he wanted to get the hardware back and potentially end his career with the hardware, which I think would be the proverbial cherry on top when you consider everything else he's done. So I think that would have been a reason. That's the only thing I can think of why he would volunteer to take that matchup last minute.
What about you, Ted?
Well, the other thing is, yes, the hardware he wants, and nobody loves a challenge more than Manny Pacquiao. That is true. However, the money, he needs the money. He has a lot of expenses. He's got a lot of people hanging around him. Even on this fight, he had dozens and dozens of people. He flew over dozens of people, media people, all kinds, put them up in the hotel. When they fly back to the Philippines, they got to quarantine for 10 days. Somebody's got to pay for all that stuff. That's Manny Pacquiao. It's a lot of money, and he's looking at running for president of the Philippines. He's almost likely to run for president. There's no way. I mean, if King Kong was the replacement fighter, he would have said yes, and Manny would have found a way to get out of that fight without getting beat up. It doesn't matter. He needs the money, and he loves the title, and he loves the fame and the fame, but he loves the fortune just as much.
Yeah, because when you actually think of Manny Pacquiao, he always says, "Oh, I do fight for passion. It's not about the money. I want to challenge myself. I want to challenge the best." This is the template Manny Pacquiao that we've been hearing for years, right? This is his usual lines. But at this point of his career, I mean, Ted feels that he's done it. He took this fight because of the money, because he needs it. But is it time to actually maybe think twice when Manny Pacquiao says that, because he's just plainly doing it for the money at this point? Just maybe.
Well, okay, I'll take that first. I know V and you, Jam, totally agree. Covered boxing for many years. It's hard to get that kind of rush in life in any other endeavor. Stepping through those ropes, and all you got to do is train hard for 8 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that, and you can get a pocket full of money. It's not easy to get that kind of chunk of change in any other endeavor, and also the rush. And that's why a lot of boxers hang on way too long. They just can't say goodbye because it's an addiction. So yeah, there's that. And he loves the rush, and Manny's a phenomenal, legendary competitor. There's absolutely no question about it. But at the same time, we all know he needs the money.
How about you, V?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to disagree with that. Pacquiao says at this stage he's not fighting strictly for the money, and he'll take challenges like this to support that statement. But I mean, let's look at the reality. You put that type of money in any of our faces, in anyone's face, they're going to do it again. So to say that he's not, I couldn't co-sign that. He's absolutely fighting for the money.
But we're talking about taking risk, right? But the initial opponent here that he was supposed to fight was the real risk, I believe, and that was fighting Errol Spence Jr. Now, I want to get your opinion on this, because I really do feel that if that fight went through, Manny Pacquiao would have been stopped. Okay, now people are going to say that no, that is not the case, because he is prepared for Errol Spence and southpaw to orthodox, all those changes. But the way I'm seeing it here, it's not even about the styles. It's about the Manny Pacquiao that showed up on fight night. He lost his reflexes. Gone. Like, he was getting double jab in the face that easy. He didn't have his legs. So it makes me believe that if it was Errol Spence in there, he would have been badly hurt. And I don't think he would have made it to the 12th and final round. But, I want to get your guys' take. Let's start with V.
I think conventional logic agrees with what you're saying, but the flip side too, since Errol Spence returned from his car accident, we saw him against Danny Garcia. Be very candid, as much as I like Danny Garcia didn't really challenge him a whole lot. So we don't really know everything we want to know about Errol Spence. And this retina tear, I think, my personal theory, my opinion, I think it is some residual effect from that accident. You don't really see a guy tear a retina in training with 16-ounce gloves and headgear. There was some type of damage to that eye that led to the tear, I believe. I could be 100% wrong, but I believe so. So long story short, I don't think we really know what we were getting with Spence. But to support the point you are making, one thing we do know, Pacquiao at his age has been out of the ring for 2 years. You can't take an athlete that age, no matter how great they are, and put them out of the ring for 2 years and see them come back as effective. That's a tall order. At his age, it's a really tall order. I personally felt Pacquiao should have taken some type of tune-up fight because of the long layoff, and he would have had a better grip on what was going on. But the opportunity was presented. We spoke about the fact that he went for the money, and I think going into the big match immediately did not work in his favor.
Yeah, I think at this point we really can't do anything anymore. It's all just the what ifs, right? What could have been, what would have been, because we can't tell it for a fact. But it's always fun to, of course, deep into that, dive into that conversation as well. What about you, Ted? What would have happened in there, do you think, if it was Errol Spence Jr.?
Well, yeah, I guess you don't know, but you do know Lake Customato said something to the effect, and I guess I'm going to paraphrase here. You can look like a champion in training, but when you step into the ring, that's all of a sudden when you look old. And I've seen this movie before with Manny. I mean, he always looks absolutely scintillating in training, and he's got a pretty good social media team and the hype around him. And everybody gets all hyped up and going, oh my God, look how amazing and how fast he looks. But man, and this time he looked great in training, all the stuff. But I've been up close there in boxing training gyms before with Manny and other fighters. And I've learned my lesson not to gush too much about what I see when they're hitting the punch mitts. It's a big difference when you're hitting the punch mitts with no opposition. And then when you get in the ring and then you see you got another professional in front of you, a professional killer in front of you. In this case, Manny, when he got into the ring, I mean, it was about third round or so, he just lost it. And he looked his age. So it's possible, very possible that's what would have happened against Spence. You'd have to figure that was what was going to happen based upon what we saw.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Manny Pacquiao looked great in the first round. The activity was there, movement was there, but it all stopped. Like, it was an abrupt stop right at the following round, and it was surprising. And turns out, like Kim Pacquiao said, and he said as well, that he started cramping as early as the second. So that actually explains why he stopped moving around. But here's like what Ted said. Right, you can look like $1 million in training. That's what they always say, right? Look, $1 million in training. Once you get in there, it's a whole different story. I thought personally that Manny Pacquiao looked okay. Of course, he did not look like the young Manny Pacquiao that we used to have, like throwing like 30 punches in like 3-4 seconds. That kind of Manny Pacquiao. But for a 42-year-old athlete, I thought he looked decent. But again, what shows up in training camp and what shows up in inside the ring on fight night are two totally different things. But I think here's the $1 million question now, since we've been talking about $1 million. Okay, Manny Pacquiao said after that fight that he's leaning toward retirement, right? 60-40, right? He had some rest, okay, and now he's talking about coming back in January, right? And he even said he's open to doing a rematch with Ugas, right? A lot of people are saying that it's time for him to hang it up, but somehow Manny Pacquiao, I feel he's gonna fight on, and he's open to the idea of fighting again, right? The question is, if it was up to you, would you rather see him do another fight, regardless of the opponent, or would you rather see him hang him up? Let's start with Ted.
Well, I'm not the kind of person that likes to tell other people what they should do with their lives. I mean, I know everybody's in a rush. Hey, Manny, hang him up. And, if he wants to fight, I guess he should fight. I mean, I personally, my opinion is he looked old in the ring the other night, and but it's not my business to tell him what to do with his life. So I'd like to, one thing you can't do, you can't serve two masters at the same time, not in boxing. No way. No way. There was pictures of Manny. He'd go through his training during the day this time, and then at night he'd be on the video like we are on a Zoom call back to the Senate or back to his political operatives in the Philippines. And we all know that there was a lot of intrigue going on with Manny and getting ousted from his party and all the drama with the politics. And that's not happening. You can't do that in boxing. You're going to be fighting at that level. You got to pay attention solely to this. So it's either one of the, that's what I would say. It's one or the other. And I'd prefer him to see him quit politics and stick to boxing if he's going to box, and pick the right opponent if that's what he wants to do. But to do both, there's just no way. I think it's pretty sad, actually, to watch him try to do both, because it's not possible to do both. You have to focus on one or the other. You want to be a boxer? Focus on boxing.
Yeah, especially at his age, right? I mean, he's not getting any younger. At 42 years old, might as well, if you want to keep competing at a high level. I agree with Ted, might as well focus on this alone. But hey, Ted, it's not like he has a choice. He's been elected by the people of the Philippines, so he doesn't have much of a choice in there, unless he actually submits a resignation paper, which I don't think is ever going to happen. But what about you, V? Do you want to see Manny Pacquiao go at it one more time, or time to call it a day?
I think we saw enough there to support those who probably feel he needs to retire. Me personally, I think about what he's done in the sport, and I think about the fact that most of our legends in the sport have been beaten into retirement in a way that was absolutely convincing. You think about, well, I guess I probably shouldn't name any. I don't want anyone coming after me, but yeah, the thing with Pacquiao, although he lost pretty convincingly, he was in the fight. He only landed 21 less total punches than his opponent. It was a bad stylistic matchup. He took it with 2 weeks notice, basically, as far as that particular opponent. So I think there's a case to be made for him having a rematch, at least in this situation. And I think that on the heels of this fight, he might be fresher now that he's taken this fight, stay in shape, whatever. I think he could come back and make it interesting. I don't know that he beats Ugas even with the full head of steam and not being rusty. I just think stylistically it's a bad matchup. But to sum it all up, I do think there is a case to be made for him to take that rematch at least before he walks off into the sunset.
Or is it better to say, V, that maybe we don't want to see a legend go out, on a losing note? Because we've seen it over and over again. The likes of Sugar Ray Leonard, the likes of Roberto Duran, retired by the same guy. By the way, the likes of Muhammad Ali, right? Rarely do we see that boxers go out on a blaze of glory. But we want them to give it to them, like, you deserve this. All right. If anyone deserves to go out on a winning note, I think it's going to be Manny Pacquiao. Right? Do you think that's, one of the things that people are looking at, experts are looking at? That's why they would want to see Manny Pacquiao go at it again.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something to support. Like I said, me personally, I'm used to seeing, well, we all on this panel are used to seeing legends get literally beat into retirement. He was still competitive, and that version of Pacquiao, not at his best, I think still beats a great percentage of what's out there. So I don't have a problem if he takes their rematch, whether he wins or loses. I think 100% he'll make a better account for himself, and maybe it'll just be the moral victory of doing better and walking out with the better performance. But hit or miss, win, lose, or draw, I do think the next time we see him in the ring will be the last, but I do think we'll see him in the ring again.
Well, let's not break down this fight, but if we're talking about an Ugas rematch, would you favor Manny Pacquiao to beat Ugas in a rematch, Ted and V?
Would I bet on Manny?
Yeah.
No.
How about
No,
how about
I'm
you?
not a betting man either, but and so definitely not on that one. And I kind of was kicking myself. When I saw the odds, and I looked at Ugas before the fight, and everyone's saying like, oh, this guy's a bum. He's going to get beat. He's a nobody and everything. I was like, he looked kind of confident standing there, and you always got to be wary of those last minute guys. And he's a Cuban fighter. We all know how well trained they are. So yeah, I don't think he should have been that big an underdog, but I wouldn't bet on Pacquiao now on the next fight.
What about you, V?
Yeah, I do bet sometimes, but no, I don't think I would feel strong enough to bet on Pacquiao in a rematch. I don't know. Here's the thing: when you look at Ugas and the type of skills that he has as a Cuban fighter, very fundamental fighter, and that type of fighter, if he has a durable chin, is going to give Pacquiao problems 9 times out of 10. We saw it with Marquez, we saw it with Morales, we saw it with other fighters. So yeah, I don't like a bet for Pacquiao and that if it came down to it, not at all.
That's fair enough, and I don't think he's going to be a favorite either. Anyway, if you're the odds maker, it's going to it will be hard to make a case to make the guy a favorite. If a rematch is going to be booked. But I guess, yeah, you go ahead.
Let me just say this though. Again, I come back to this. Having covered boxing and followed it as a fan all my life, and I just think that it's so hard for boxers to say goodbye on top. It just seems like an impossible thing to walk away. I mean, what Marvin Hagler did it. And he was, I don't know how many I don't know. Do you know many that do this? It's just
Andre Ward.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's such a rush. It's such an adrenaline rush to be a champion, to win. I think boxing's unlike other sports, and you just say, yeah, I'm still the man. I can do this. And again, the money, when you're a champion, you make serious money, and all it takes is a couple months training, and you just feel like you can do it again and again. And the only time you realize you can't do it is when you get the tar beaten out of you. And like we said before, it's happened time and again. It's so hard to say goodbye when you're on top in boxing.
And maybe another name that perhaps we can add there is Joe Calzaghe, right? I mean, he retired undefeated. I thought that he could have, fight on against better opposition because he mostly fought, in Europe, and he could have fought better competition in the US, but Joe decided to retire instead. So he retired undefeated, whatever that, whatever that reflects on his legacy or
Yeah,
whatnot.
Mayweather also. I mean, he's basically going to fighting internet YouTube stars. I mean,
Well, see, Mayweather actually did it the only way I would do it if I was a fighter. I mean, you don't want to fight real competition and get beat the hell up. So what you do is you fight guys who have an established base, YouTubers, MMA guys, who can bring their fans from their perspective arenas and help you make a lot of money. That's probably the only way I would consider to continue fighting when I know I can't beat the top level guys.
Right.
Right. That's why when it comes to the business model of boxing, it's hard to say that these top fighters shouldn't follow Floyd. Floyd started doing with the exhibition with Asigawa, then people started coming up with the exhibitions too, because he actually sets the bar, when it comes to the business side of boxing. He knows it very well, and he knows that he can draw this type of money even by fighting YouTubers, right? It actually works for him. It really does. But here's what, and let's go back to Manny Pacquiao, right? So when we talk about Manny Pacquiao, he's very dear to Filipinos. Okay, he's a senator now, and no matter what happens, he's going to the Hall of Fame, right? So definitely, he leaves a huge impact to the Filipino fight fans. Okay, but I want to know your take. What kind of impact do you think he is leaving the U.S. audience? All right, let's start with V.
I actually a couple years ago, I was asked a very similar question by a member of the Filipino media, and I was telling them at that time that I think Pacquiao, to me, is probably the most transcendent fighter the sport has seen since Ali. I mean, when you look at the way he impacts his country, the way he, not only his country, but other people, like the guy has an amazing heart, has an amazing family. I was blessed to meet his family, his mother, his wife, the kids a couple of times. I mean, just his legacy overall is the way you want to see athletes shape their legacy, and his commitment to the sport. I mean, everything about him With a few exceptions, I've grown to appreciate, and I think most of the American public looks at him the same way. I was listening to some fans the other night as I watched the fight locally here in South Florida, and my impression of him was their impression. You know, even in defeat, these guys had great respect for him, and they were talking about what he's accomplished. I don't think you can knock that no matter where you're from. So for me, he has an incredible legacy, and I think it'll live on well beyond boxing.
Ed?
Yeah, in the U.S., there's a lot of people I know who know nothing about boxing, but they know Manny Pacquiao, and that tells you a lot. But let's go back even to the beginning, when back in the mid '90s, when I was writing for the Ring magazine back then, and we started covering a young Manny Pacquiao. And this was sort of, the internet was just getting going. And I was sending in articles about this guy, this just absolute beast of a fighter that was just wowing fans in the Philippines and then started wowing fans around Asia. And the word got out to hardcore boxing fans. And he was only known to hardcore boxing fans like ourselves. I'm sure V remembers, probably heard about him back in the day, this guy from the Philippines, from Asia, just tearing through everyone they put in front of him. And so even right then and there, he had established himself as being a legend amongst hardcore boxing fans. There was almost no one had ever seen anything like him in generations. So yeah, and then when he went on to all the fights, and he would fight anybody, and he only wanted to fight the best, and the Morales fights, Barrero, and then De La Hoya thing was just set him off on another stratosphere. And then and then fighting guys like Margarito. I mean, that was insanity to fight a guy like that big, and then he beat the pulp out of him. And it's just, he is just in another world as far as athletes go. And I think even when he retires, the name Manny Pacquiao will just move on to the pantheon of athletes, where you just say the name. It'll be kind of like saying Joe Louis or Babe Ruth in an American concept, or Pele in soccer, football, something like that. He's just going to be in one of that rarefied territory of just very few athletes ever get into.
Yeah,
I wanted to interject really quick to kind of piggyback off Ted. I remember at one point, I don't even remember what year this was, but it was fairly early on, and Emmanuel Stewart, God rest his soul, but he made a comment to me about this small kid, out of the Philippines, who's going to light the world on fire. So he was on a lot of people's radar, very early, and I think it almost became a cult-like following. I can remember I started covering fights in 2004. But prior to that, I used to do some work covering the local Miami Heat NBA team. And I remember going to watch a fight in, I believe it was a gentleman's club locally or something. But in the room, it was a private room, mostly media members, but it was a couple guys from Don King's camp, couple local radio guys, Tom Joyner, but they were all there to watch Pacquiao. I want to say that might have been the first Morales fight, but they were all buzzed about this kid who was growing. So, I mean, people in America, like Ted was saying, the impression of Manny Pacquiao is incredible. That's why he's still getting so many people to pay to see his fights.
Right. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. He knows it. Manny knows that. And it's hard to, say goodbye to that. And he maybe feels he had the wrong opponent, or he took the 2 years off. And so maybe we will see him again. I think the other thing is, and one thing I always noticed from Manny from the start, and JM, you remember this from back in the day, when Manny has always lived on the edge. He's always walked on a high wire in his life and in boxing. I can tell you there were plenty of times where Manny didn't train very hard back in the day. I was the ring announcer for the fight against Nadal Hussein in Antipolo, just outside of Manila. And you can look it up on YouTube. And I had real long hair at the time. And, you probably won't even recognize me. But yeah, I was in there. Carlos Padilla from the Thrilla of Manila was the referee. And Manny got nailed with a jab. And just put him on Queer Street. He went down. And if it wasn't for Carlos's friendly count, Manny would have been knocked out, you know. So he wasn't even in that great a shape, but he came back and then he mauled Hussein in the next round or two or something. And then the ref and Padilla waved it off. But there were so many instances where he just was living on a high wire. Larios was another one. Larios, that was in Manila, also put him on Queer Street. And he managed, he wasn't even training that hard, but he managed to come back. There were so many instances where Manny, and then he was running for Congress at the same time as he was training for fights. I mean, who does that? Again, he's living on a high wire. So his whole life is always just like this sort of, he's on the precipice. Oh, there's no way he can do it. He's going too far up in weight, everything. And he manages to pull it off. So it's been an amazing thrill ride and fans just eat it up.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about you talk about him getting put on Queer Street and all that during those fights. Actually, you mentioned about he ran for Congress. Well, the first time he did run for Congress, he was put on Queer Street too because he he lost the elections, right? So that's what happened during his first candidacy. But the second time he tried, he won the position, and now he's a senator. And I think it's all but announced by Manny that I think everybody knows by now that he is going to run for president. Right?
How does you tell me, how does he fight if he's running for president? Because he's got to start running for president in September, October, or something like that.
Well, the elections won't be held until I believe May of next year. So if he is going to fight in January, I think that's going to be, perhaps part of his campaign period. His way of getting his name out there. Again, we can only assume this because, a lot of people think he is running for president. Manny himself is yet to confirm that, but that's just the way I see it. It's really hard to touch the politics side of it, but a lot of people are, a lot of my sources too, right, say that Manny, has been convinced of running for president as early as 2017. So they feel like, this is a long time coming, right? That it is apparent and that it is going to happen. So whatever happens in the next few months, if he fights again, or if he just decides to announce his candidacy, I guess, we can only wait. We can only, wait and see what's going to happen next. But here's my last question, okay? And I really need you to break this down for me. All right. It might be hard because Manny is yet to retire. He's yet to officially retire. But let's just say that Manny Pacquiao indeed retires today, right? No more January fight, no more December fight, no more last hurrah, right? Who would you put in the all-time list? Who is greater, Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather Jr.? Let's start with V.
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a really, really tough one. I'll tell you why. Of course, Mayweather. See, here's the thing. Mayweather fundamentally, to me, has an argument for one of the best skills fighters the sport has ever seen.
No doubt.
Just the way he went about things, the level of competition, all the titles, the fact that he started so young in terms of winning titles. People can say a lot about Mayweather. One thing they can't say is that, he was afraid when he got in the ring. There was a lot of talk before. When he got in the ring, he executed and he performed to perfection. That's an incredible feat because the true mark of a legendary champion, it's not only beating the men people think you can't beat, but it's beating the men people think you should or can beat. When you think about a lot of our greats, they lost to people you didn't ever think they lose to. Even Manny Pacquiao, as great as he is, some of the guys who were able to beat him earlier in his career without going to box rec, you don't even know their names. So Floyd was able to avoid those bad nights, no matter who was across from him. So that's legendary. But when you look at what Pacquiao has accomplished, eight division world champion. The fact that just a couple years ago we saw him in with Marquez. I mean, when he was knocked out in that fight, I'll be honest, I didn't even know we'd see Pacquiao a lot. Like, that really looked bad that night. I thought for his physical health, he would be done. But not only was he not done, he came back and beat one of the better fighters in the division in this era, in Keith Thurman. Very underrated fighter, power puncher, whole 9 yards. So I don't know that I mean, very few things in life stump me to where I don't have an answer. This might be one of them. I don't know who you give the edge to there if you have to pick one. I really don't know that I can answer that. It's an argument to be made for both, and I would not tell someone they're wrong, whichever one they argued for.
But if you would give like at least even 0.2 or 0.5% advantage, right? Who would you favor between the two? I mean, here's the thing. The thing about this is, it's subjective, right? You can never tell who's wrong or who's right, okay? Because it's always a subject for debate, right? But just for you, V, just using your own standards, just you being objective and all that. Who would you slightly favor between the two?
See, it's still two answers. Me personally, I'm a fundamentals guy. So when I see a guy executing a certain way that no other style can probably conquer, I have to give kudos to that greatness. Flip side to that, though, when we look, although he's used some catch weights and people apply the asterisk because of that, when you look at the people Pacquiao defeated to create his legacy, I mean, like I said, if we're splitting hairs and, giving that little bit of, I think there's an argument to be made that Pacquiao, not only between these two, but I think there's an argument to be made that Pacquiao would get the edge. I mean, it's a guy who won titles over 4 different decades. It's just the entire legacy is just, it's bananas. I don't know how you overstep that. I personally like fundamentals. I think any other angle might point to Pacquiao.
Yeah, and I think it might even be fair to say that these accomplishments won't ever be done again, right? I mean, it's just so hard because I think part of his accomplishments was also due to circumstances. When he was just a teenager with barely anything to eat, of course, it started the 105 division, and then you go up, and then as you age, your body grows. I think a lot of his accomplishments, and this is not to discredit Manny, it also has something to do with circumstances, right? With how he lived his life, as a young boy growing up and all that. But enough of me. I want to hear Ted. I want to hear what Ted has to say.
I agree with V in that there's a fine line there because it depends on what you like. So there's not enough beer left in the keg to settle this argument. Okay. All right. It's just, this could go on forever. Stylistically, pure boxing style. Okay. There's probably maybe nobody better than Mayweather. It just was, he's just phenomenal when he was on. But if you want to talk about legacy, about fighting so many top names and putting yourself out there without and putting yourself at risk time and time and time and time again, I would give the edge to Manny Pacquiao. Again, it's like judging a fight. This is what a lot of people don't understand. Judging is a subjective enterprise, and that's why everyone goes, this guy didn't win the fight. I said, no, you don't understand. It's subjective. It depends on what you're looking for. Sometimes it's not always cut and dry. So if you're talking about stylistically, and that if you love scientific fighters, Filipinos fans despise scientific fighters, hate them. They get booed out of the arena. Even some fantastic fighters get booed out of the arena. But you'll never get a Filipino to say that a great scientific fighter was one of the best ever. They like brawlers. So Pacquiao is a godsend to Filipinos. It's like something fell from heaven here.
Well, with the exception of Flash Elorde, though, Ted, right?
What? Flash was a all heart, blood and guts fighter. He had great talent, great skills, but
if we will be applying the same standards, Filipino fans are saying right now, they would actually label Flash Elorde as a runner, right? But of course, we are not going to do that. They are not going to do that to Flash Elorde. But I agree with that. This sort of list, it's just very subjective. And it's not like there is something set on stone written on it that this guy's. I guess it's consensus, it's unanimous that Sugar Ray Robinson is the greatest of all time. At least I believe about 98% of people would actually agree. If, of course, they can also back it up, right? But but when it comes to the top 10, top 15, is just really hard to come up with because as Ted said, and I even said earlier as well, very subjective. All right, very subjective. So it all depends, I guess, on the person making that list. But guys, I want to thank you so much for joining me here for this episode. Right, V, I know you're busy, and I appreciate, man. It's great to finally meet you.
Hey, likewise, I appreciate the opportunity. Open to doing it anytime you need me. Let me know, man. I love the Filipino people. I'm actually jealous of Ted right now. He's hanging out over there. I would have preferred to be
Quarantine,
over there
V.
taking this in.
But it's not too bad. It's like an apartment here. So I got room to move around, but I'm in quarantine.
Hey, well, you're in quarantine in the Philippines. See, I would like to be in the Philippines. I have some really great Filipino friends, but I've always had amazing respect for the culture. I thank you. And hey, congratulations too to the country on your gold medals in the Olympics.
Oh, yes. Yes, we
That was
of
great.
course, yeah.
A
Huge
woman
feat.
weightlifter, wasn't
Yeah.
she? Was
Italy,
phenomenal.
yes,
With that turned heads, that's for sure.
Yeah, true.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for that, V. Ted, thank you so much for your time.
JMV, great rapping with you guys. That was a lot of fun.
Likewise, gents. Thank you for everything. Let's do it again sometime.
Yes,
Do
we'll
it.
do it again soon. Thank you, guys.
Take care.